Hello and welcome to another edition of the Business of Story. I'm your intrepid host, Park Howell, and today you'll learn how the world's largest social fundraising platform, which has raised more than $15 billion in donations from 120 million donors, uses storytelling and social media to turn moments into movements, and how you can too. Have you ever told yourself you have no interesting stories to tell, or that no one wants to hear your stories, or that you're just not very comfortable telling stories? In fact, you might even kind of think you suck at it. Well, here's a trick. Remove the word storytelling from your language. Instead, replace it with the word moment. Because every story is about a moment in time when something changed. Take your audience to that moment and describe the change that happened. It's just really that easy. 2 years ago, Michelle and I were invited to visit Sir Richard Branson on his private island called Necker in the British Virgin Islands. I shared our Business of Story masterclass with several large American car dealers who were along for this 7-day trip. In the Great House on Necker, which is the gathering spot situated on the highest point of the island where Michelle and I stayed, Richard Branson has large leather-bound notebooks for each of his guests to share an experience they had during their stay on the island. You can only imagine the names and notes in those books, but I'm not going to share it now because it's just going to sound like name dropping. But here's the thing. He doesn't ask you to write an epic story about your stay. Nope. Branson wants guests to capture a moment on the island that struck them deeply. As one of the leading business and philanthropic storytellers in the world, Branson says, quote, entrepreneurs who make a difference are, in effect, professional storytellers, end quote. So if you and your team are struggling to tell your stories, reduce them down to telling a tale about a moment when everything changed, and use this anecdote to make your business point that actually moves people to action. Of course, I can help you and your people excel through the stories you tell through in-person, virtual, and hybrid storytelling training and deliberate practice programs. You will learn the 3 proven narrative frameworks that we have taught to thousands of leaders around the world. Or you can even start right now by taking my quick ABTs of Agile Communications online course that will, within an hour, make you a more confident, persuasive, and influential communicator using the and, but, therefore story framework. Just visit businessofstory.com/ABT or send me your training request to park@businessofstory.com. You will be joining the likes of the Home Depot, Walmart Canada, Intel, Dell, the U.S. Air Force, Banner Health, and McCormick & Company, the Spice People, who rely on the Business of Story training to help their people excel through the stories they tell. Because if you're not wielding the power of story like today's guest from GoFundMe is, then you're not leveraging the most influential form of business and nonprofit communication there is to quickly and consistently move your audiences to action.
Well, I think this is something that GoFundMe is able to do, so maybe it wouldn't work for every listener here, but I think that starting with heart means that every story that you write has an emotionally resonant theme to it. So when I'm sitting down and I'm writing my copy for my social posts, I'm thinking about what words and what phrases can I use to really draw someone in and make them feel connected to not only our brand, but to the people in this story. Because at the end of the day, every piece of content that I'm sharing, I want someone to take an action from that. I want someone to click through, visit the fundraiser, maybe donate. I want someone to share the post. And I think that if you can speak to someone and touch their heart, I think that's one of the ways that you can drive those actions. So that's something I always try to keep in the back of my mind whenever I'm storytelling.
For almost a decade, Brittany Cabriales has helped build GoFundMe social channels from the ground up with heartfelt, authentic storytelling. Her ideas and content have helped turn GoFundMe from a, quote, little website that's kind of like Kickstarter, end quote, into a household name known by millions across the globe. As a huge proponent of organic social strategies, Brittany's current work focuses on blending social media trends and conversations with cultural insights to create meaningful brand moments and drive business growth. Brittany said, "We know that asking for help is hard, but every day through GoFundMe's content, we strive to tell a different story. That help is powerful. It connects us all, and everyone should feel safe asking for it. From small moments to big movements, our storytelling is meant to inspire and empower our followers to think, to give, to be kinder, and to look for the good happening in the world." So today, you will learn the importance of being agile to create more relevant content, how to create stories focused on a theme or word to build brand association through a singular narrative, and why it's important to show, don't sell, and how to create successful calls to action. So please welcome to the Business of Story to help you turn your moments into movements through your storytelling, Brittany Cabriolis. Brittany, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Park.
I know you're coming to us from San Diego, and you guys have been absolutely hammered by winter storms this year, and I know that because they go across San Diego and they end up in my backyard up here in northern Arizona, and we're expecting 2 more feet of snow between 10 p.m. tonight and first thing Thursday morning, and I think that's coming through you guys right now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, we are lucky enough to have a break in the sky at the moment, but yeah, inches and inches. I can't remember the last time we've ever had this much rain.
Yeah, it's been pretty incredible. It's great to have you here. We are going to talk about how you use storytelling at GoFundMe, and you've been there for quite a while. I mean, you've been there for over a decade, right? Working, or almost a decade.
I'm knocking on the door of a decade. Yeah, 9 years. It's been incredible to witness. I remember when I first joined, people would ask me, "Where do you work?" And I'd say GoFundMe, and they'd be like, "I don't know if I've heard of that. Can you tell me what that is?" Or like, "Oh, that's like Kickstarter, right?" So now it's really been cool to see that transform, and we just have amazing, brand name recognition.
And what do you attribute that to?
I think that we have a product that has touched almost everyone's lives, not even in that you might have had to use the product before, but I would say that there's probably a chance that everyone has donated to a GoFundMe before.
And what is your backstory? How did you find yourself arriving at GoFundMe and then staying there for as long as you have, which is kind of unusual in this day and age of people popping in and out of jobs?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I also kind of have an unusual background in how I found the job. I was a psychology major in school. I went to UC San Diego. After that, I started teaching at a charter school up in Los Angeles, and I wasn't sure if teaching was going to be my forever field. So I was considering going back and getting my master's. And while I was kind of in this, time in my life where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was looking for jobs, and I saw a position at this company called GoFundMe, which I'll be honest, I had never heard of either. And I took the role as a customer service representative. I was in that role for a few months. We were growing like crazy. The founders at the time were still running the day-to-day, and they were like, "Look, Britt, what do you want to do? What do you like here? What interests you the most?" And there was one girl at the time, her name was Kelsey, and she's like doing cool stuff in marketing and PR and our influencer stuff. So I was like, I kind of like what she does. Like, how do I get involved in that? And they were like, great. They kind of just took a chance on me, and I've been doing it ever since.
So you are self-taught around social media? You didn't have a big background in that? You just kind of taught yourself, or did they do a lot of teaching there for you?
Yeah, I would say mostly self-taught. I think the best experience you can get is in the real world. So I definitely do that. Podcasts, reading Adweek, being on Twitter, being on LinkedIn, like it's all been one big school for me.
So Can you help us understand the difference between GoFundMe and Kickstarter? Because you're right. Whenever I hear of GoFundMe, the first thing that pops in my mind is Kickstarter. I've seen a lot more of that. I've done less work on GoFundMe. But what are the differences in the platforms?
Yeah, I would say at the heart of it, Kickstarter tends to be more of a passion project, business building, crowdfunding website. So it's where you go to launch a big idea. It's where you go to get a product to the market. And part of what happens on Kickstarter is, people, pledge these contributions to you. And in return, they typically get a sneak peek at the product. They get perks of some sort. On GoFundMe, we tend to be more focused on the personal fundraising stories. So our top 3 categories, as most people would assume, are medical, memorial, emergency. That's the bulk of our business. And we've really just become part of the zeitgeist because of, people falling through the cracks of the system and needing support and needing help from their community. And, GoFundMe has been able to support them in that.
Mm-hmm. So, for instance, maybe someone has a home and they get flooded by this amazing amount of rain you all have been getting over there. And, they're barely making ends meet just in life in general. They don't have insurance or whatever. They need to raise $10,000 to fix the roof, the flood or whatever. They would maybe go to a GoFundMe then and start a campaign and say, hey, I need a little help here.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And that would be that would be a perfect use case of our product too. But not only that, like you can, if you wanted to, you could kind of take that Kickstarter type of business idea and come over to GoFundMe, because secondarily, there are a lot of benefits to using GoFundMe over Kickstarter. Like I know on Kickstarter, you have to have your project approved before it can go live. You typically have to, I think, reach your goal in order to be able to have the funds. So if you fall short of that goal, you don't get it. On GoFundMe, we don't have any of those requirements. So it depending on what you need, GoFundMe can fill, a lot of the needs for people looking for money.
Mm-hmm. And how do you use storytelling? What's your approach?
Yeah, I mean, where to begin? I think that over the years, it's changed a lot. I would say when I first started, the bulk of our storytelling really relied on building trust, really relied on educating people. What is GoFundMe? So in the beginning, a lot of our content was resharing, news articles where we were mentioned, creating video content that was kind of like a sizzle reel of all of the mentions of GoFundMe in communities across the country. Like I remember having to put those together in the very beginning. As we've grown and as we've kind of built that name recognition, we've been able to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to our content. And I think that what we've come to realize is that, I would say we probably have more stories than Netflix. Every fundraiser is a story. And that's kind of what we try to do on our socials, is to highlight those stories that are getting a lot of attention, that are getting a lot of visitors, that are getting a lot of donations, and kind of just help push them out into the world and show the power, the collective power of people coming together, and how beautiful that can be for the people on our platform.
Of the 10 years, or in the 10 years that you have been there, is there one story that really stands out in your mind as a good example of how you all use it, and then, of course, the impact that particular story had?
I get this question a lot, and I feel like I change my answer all the time. But I would have to say one of the most recent things that we did that really moved me was right around the time of when there was a lot of violence happening towards the Asian American community. It's about 2 years ago. And we saw this, trend happening of, people getting hurt in the streets and attacked. And we were like, we want to do something about this. What should we do? And we contacted a few influencers in the AAPI space. And we were like, hey, what can we do to help? And together with them, we built the AAPI Community Relief Fund. And we worked together to create a centralized place where people could come not only to, leave messages of support, but to donate to organizations or individual fundraisers that were on the front lines of, helping victims, creating lasting change. And it was just really cool to see that, like, when something is happening in the world, like, we have the power to make a difference. That fund ended up raising several $1,000,000, and it's still running to this day. And that was one that definitely really resonated with.
What does AAPI stand for?
Asian American and Pacific Islanders.
Okay. And so you were raising funds for them to use for what?
So the Community Relief Fund, it benefited a whole host of nonprofits in that space. I think some of the nonprofits were helping Asian American businesses make sure that they can make it through the pandemic. They were helping, smaller communities in San Francisco and Los Angeles, in these Chinatowns, gain access to food, gain access to clothing. It was a whole host of organizations that were on the ground doing really impactful things for the community.
It's amazing. Are there channels in particular in social media that you prefer over others, or that your stories seem to perform better on than others for GoFundMe?
Yeah, it definitely varies by platform. And, obviously every audience that we've built on each platform varies slightly. For GoFundMe, I know that our audience tends to lean more female and skew a little bit older. We always kind of try to keep that in the back of our mind as we're creating content. But, Twitter is the place where you want to be when you have breaking news, when you want to join a conversation in the moment and really become that relevant brand that's, in on the conversations that are happening. Instagram, we've found a lot of success just highlighting these individual stories of kindness, of good news. When there's, a shooting and we get something out that we're like, hey, here's how you can help. It's really become a place where we, pull at the heartstrings, I guess, if you want to say that. And Facebook has kind of just been our ever consistent platform that, we know that the audience there is kind of decreasing, but it's always just been a steady racehorse for us that we consistently get content out on and does really well for us.
Are you using LinkedIn, TikTok, some of those other channels?
We are we're in an experimental phase figuring out what we want to do on TikTok right now. And then for LinkedIn, we are active, but it's pretty infrequent. So I would say our big three would be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And then how do you approach your story strategy? So you're in charge of getting this information out. Number one, do you have a big team that works underneath you that helps make this happen?
So at the moment, I'm actually a team of one as a social person, but I do work on I do work on our brand and creative team, and there's several of us. So I do have support when it comes to creating the content, or hey, I'm struggling with how to phrase this story. I need some help from my copywriters to really make it work. So I definitely have support from other people, but I am the only person at the moment who has that social attached to my name.
So you've got a lot on your plate. Yeah. What is your strategy then? How do you keep it all sane and successful?
Yeah. I'm just doing my best. It's really helpful to, stay closely aligned with, our marketing strategy and our business goals. So, I know that, we have key messaging that we want to push out. So I'm always trying to connect our content back to this umbrella of, help is powerful. Help is hard to ask for, but when you do it, it can be amazing. And, as long as every piece of content is kind of laddering up to these main messages that we've identified, then that's a win for us. There's also secondary goals like, how much donation volume am I driving? How many new campaign starts am I driving? But at the heart of it, I think it's all just making sure that the content that I'm creating is aligning back to our main message.
And in doing so, in that content, are you telling actual stories about actual people that have been impacted by GoFundMe?
Yeah, that's exactly right. All of our stories feature people who have current fundraisers on our platform or have in the past. So the most recent story that I shared today was for an 8-year-old boy who loves Waffle House. He would go there every morning for breakfast, and he became friends with a worker there named Devante. And he learned that Devante was saving up for a car, but his apartment, he found black mold in it, and he had to uproot his family and move him into a hotel, and that really drained his savings. So this 8-year-old kid talked to his parents and said, hey, I want to start a GoFundMe for Devontae to help him. And they started a GoFundMe. And last time I checked, it was over like $30,000 to help him get this new car and to make sure that his family had, a safe, clean roof above their heads.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's incredible. So I go back to the comparison to Kickstarter, where Kickstarter is doing really good work. I mean, helping companies. It gives you a channel to be able to launch products and services and whatever, and get people to invest in it. And you give them some things, for their investment. You raise X amount of money, you get that money, and then hopefully you're going to use it well and you're going to pay off. GoFundMe is almost more philanthropic. It sounds like in the aspect of you are just simply helping people navigate through life when things get really tough and they need some extra cash. But you did say that people will show up with business opportunities and say, look, I'm trying to launch something and I need $10,000 to do that. So they'll do it right there with GoFundMe. Are they typically purpose-driven brands versus just a product or service out there? Because it sounds like you're very purpose-driven focused.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we see across the board all different kinds of stuff. But that's interesting that you said about our philanthropic aspect, because we definitely feel that way. And I think that's part of why a lot of people do assume that GoFundMe is a nonprofit, because we really just do try to show up and, be this platform that helps support communities. And I think that a lot of people associate brands doing the right thing with nonprofits where, it can be both.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely can. A couple of weeks ago, I had Ken Oliver on the show, and he heads up the foundation at Checkr, and that's CHECKR. Checkr is one of the world's largest background checking companies, screeners and whatever, and they've got this purpose, so very B2B driven, which you don't find a lot of purpose in B2B brands typically, but their purpose is called Fair Chance Hiring. Ken spent I don't know, many, many years in prison for joyriding as a kid in California. So he's in the state penitentiary system. They put him in solitary confinement for 8.5 years for reading Malcolm X because they were afraid he was going to be disruptive in the prison population. During that time, he basically educates himself enough to become like an attorney, sues the state over civil rights. Stanford takes notice of it. Another law firm comes in, represents him. He gets out, rightfully so, and starts this whole fair chance hiring program, or really gets involved in it. State, I think, even wrote him a check then for $30 million to help build out this program. And the purpose of the program is to help convicts that have paid their dues, paid their time, made a poor choice somewhere along the way, typically when they were young, and now are out, and fair chance hiring is helping them get jobs. Because they become very active, productive members of the workforce of society. And I just thought, Brittany, that whole idea about Checkr's Foundation around fair chance hiring is such a brilliant, purpose-driven brand, because they're in the background checking business, right? The screening checking business. So if they can corroborate, an ex-con has come out that can be a productive member of your company, more power to them, while underscoring the power of their own fact-finding background. So I share that with you because very rarely do we find a good, solid, purpose-driven brand in the B2B world, and I think that's a good example of it. And what you're saying is you see more of those kinds, and it could be B2C or whatever, migrating, coming over to GoFundMe, maybe because you have a little bit of that philanthropic play to it?
Yeah, it's quite possible. I think that, over the years, GoFundMe has done a really good job of associating ourselves with, these really positive words. Like we on our recent brand tracker that we did, I think the number one word that we're associated with is help. And we like to think of help as, I think some people might think of it as a negative, but we see it as a positive. And like I alluded to earlier, we're kind of building ourselves around this idea that help is powerful and help can do a lot. And when communities unite behind this idea of help, like really amazing things can happen.
So is that concept of help is powerful, sort of that singular overarching brand narrative you talked about earlier, that then it helps guide your story selection and creation and publishing, as long as it's all pillaring up to underscoring that concept of help is powerful?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Huh. You're a storyteller. I got to ask for some more stories. What's another story that pops to mind that really underscores this idea of help is powerful that you recently or maybe in the past have published?
Just going off of what you said with, talking about the prison industrial complex and convicts and all of that, a really interesting use case that I've seen over the past several years is individuals who have been wrongfully convicted of crimes, and now that DNA and all this new technology is available, they're being released, and they've been in prison for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they're coming out and they don't have anything. So a really interesting use case is people are starting GoFundMes for them to help them get back on their feet, to make sure that they have a place to stay, to make sure that they can afford some food and just basic living items. So I just think that's a really beautiful example of how people are trying to help people using our platform. And I think that another part of that story that isn't really talked about is, people come out of prison, and typically if it's for a wrongful conviction, the government or the state then pays them money. But what you don't realize is these payments can take months or years to get to these people. So GoFundMe is able to provide that immediate assistance to them when they need it. And that same can be said when, a hurricane happens. Sometimes FEMA is a little slow. Sometimes to get these funds to people and to communities to help rebuilding, it takes time, red tape, government. So having GoFundMe and being able to, start your fundraiser and have money in your bank account within a few days is just, it's life-changing for some people.
Yeah, all kinds of. So I should connect you with Ken Oliver. Maybe there's something that you can be working across with the Checker Foundation, saying how you're kind of both in that same sort of realm there. In some of the notes, Brittany, you sent over to me, I want to ask you to kind of expand on them for our listeners a little bit. Mm-hmm. You had said when it comes down to your storytelling, social media, and really I suppose this is true both online and off, storytelling anywhere. You said the importance of being agile to create more relevant content, that you have to, as a communicator, content creator, storyteller, be agile. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think the best way to put this into words is to just say you have to be aware of trends. You have to be aware of what people are talking about. And, let me try to think of an example. If I have content that I want to get out this week that I'm excited about, but Taylor Swift is releasing a new album. Now, I'm not saying this example works for every brand, but Taylor Swift is releasing a new album, and wow, my brand, our messaging kind of ladders up and could be associated with Taylor Swift enough where maybe now I'm going to adjust my content to talk about Taylor Swift and her new album. And that's when you're really going to see the spike in engagement and the spike in brand love, because now you're inserting yourself in a conversation that millions of people care about, and you're associating it with your brand. And that other content that you had planned on could probably wait a few days or a week. So it's just kind of being on your toes and knowing when to pivot, or maybe I shouldn't post this today. Maybe I should just be silent because there is a national tragedy of some sort. So that's kind of what I meant on being agile.
Yeah, so that would be maybe where your Twitter strategy comes in. She has a big announcement. It's kind of breaking news. You want to be a relevant brand. You jump on that, and so you'll post something on Twitter. And then maybe you jump over to Instagram and have a same sort of message, but you're going to pivot on what you're going to talk about. You're going to maybe pull at that heartstrings, like you said, a little bit more about that announcement, and maybe it's some particular song that's going crazy because it deals with foster children. I don't know, I'm just making this up. And, oh, by the way, you happen to have a story around funding foster programs or something, and so you might kick in with that.
Exactly. Like, I don't know if you saw, so if you've heard that there's a big drama happening between Selena Gomez and Hailey Bieber at the moment, and this might be old news by the time this podcast episode airs, but right now it's the talk of the town on TikTok, on Twitter. And Whataburger tweeted, I think it was either this morning or yesterday, nobody asked, but we're Team Selena. And I think it's gotten like over 2 million impressions, just because it's just it's culturally relevant to what's happening right now. And, that resonates with a lot of people.
And you can stub your toe doing that as well, can't you? Because you might overreact or act too quickly and push something out. And then it's like, that kind of blew up. Have you ever had that happen to you?
I cannot think of a time. We at GoFundMe, we tend to be a little more cautious in what we share, but I definitely know that there are brands out there that like to push the limits a little bit more. Mm-hmm. A recent example might be Duolingo, who everyone I'm sure has heard of, and their amazing strategy on TikTok, but they waded into some deep waters when they decided to create video content around the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, and they got a little backlash. Mm-hmm. So definitely, being careful, thinking twice before you post, definitely good qualities to have.
But you don't want to be too careful, do you? I mean, you don't want to take the edge off of some of your posting. You can only be so helpful is powerful for so long. You still want to make that same point, but I imagine you got to still find some edge in your storytelling to keep it interesting and relevant to your readers and your viewers.
Yeah, I like to say ask for forgiveness, not permission sometimes. Sometimes that's what makes sense. The other ongoing joke is that, legal is where dreams go to die. They're just always adjusting the content and, cutting it down and making it less fun. And I think sometimes you just have to trust your social team. I think that, they're experts in what they do, and there's a reason why they're, proposing this type of content. There's a reason why they want to phrase it this way. And I think that when you try to go through too many approvals or you think too hard on something, I think you lose the message and you lose how powerful it could really be.
Mm-hmm. So you've never, ever, ever pushed something out and went, ooh, I wish I hadn't have done that.
Not for, I guess I do have one example that one time we shared a tweet that we knew was going to upset people. We anticipated that. And as a group, we decided that we were going to turn off comments to this tweet. And I think that is a mistake that I greatly learned from because, rather than people just commenting how upset they were, they just started retweeting how upset they were. And that made the tweet go even further and people's ideas go even further. So that was definitely a really big learning moment for me when it comes to that kind of stuff.
So it was what? Kind of like, hey, GoFundMe is out there stating their opinion and they're not even giving me a chance to jump into the conversation. So therefore, I'm going to start my own story around this and retweet you.
Exactly.
Ouch. What was the tweet about?
It was about a fundraiser that we had to take down because it broke our terms of service.
Too controversial?
I don't think we're that controversial.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Let's move on to one of your other insights here. You said creating stories that are fully around a theme or word. And when I read that, I was going through and the way I would characterize that is finding that singular narrative. What's the one thing that we're talking about in this particular story? Quite often we as storytellers and content creators, we will get lost in that narrative. And we might have 2 or 3 narratives going on at one time, which completely confuses, distracts, and basically jettisons audiences. They will just race away from you. Is that what you mean by that thing, finding that one theme or that one word?
Yeah, kind of. I think that as you're thinking about what you want your brand to stand for, what you want people to associate with your brand, it's really helpful to think about, all right, what are the 3 to 5 things that we can post about on a consistent basis that will help us ladder towards that idea? So like I said, a couple of our things are help is powerful, help is asking for help is hard, but good things happen when you do it. So those are a couple of ours, but for instance, if you're a women's yoga brand, maybe some of yours are, nutrition, fitness, mental health. Maybe those are the 3 things that you always are going to be in your content buckets that you're going to always talk about. So now you kind of have like a guidebook of what it makes sense to talk about, so that when, Taylor Swift releases her new album, maybe that's not really part of what you've already identified as your content buckets. So maybe it doesn't make sense to jump in on a trend like that. But knowing the 3 or 4 or 5 things that you want to consistently talk about, then you can kind of start to build. My CMO always says you want to build bricks up, not out. So if you're talking about a lot of different things and you're going wider and wider and wider, you're really losing focus, and your audience isn't going to start identifying these key themes or or messages with you, because it's too broad. You're talking about too much. You really just need to focus on those few and build up so that when your customer thinks of women's empowerment, they think of your yoga brand. So that's kind of like what I meant to say.
Gotcha. So your one word then sounds like it's help, and you approach it from a different way, a lot of different ways. Help is powerful. Help is hard to ask for. Help can do wonders, whatever that is. And then you are using that as kind of your main sort of guiding light, your North Star when you're telling these stories. You want to make sure that you support that concept.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
All right. You gave me a show title, which I'm going to use because I love it. Start with Heart. How powerful storytelling on social media can inspire. So what do you mean by start with heart?
Well, I think this is something that GoFundMe is able to do. So maybe it wouldn't work for every listener here, but I think that starting with heart means that every story that you write has an emotionally resonant theme to it. So when I'm sitting down and I'm writing my copy for my social posts, I'm thinking about what words and what phrases can I use to really draw someone in and make them feel connected to not only our brand, but to the people in this story. Because at the end of the day, every piece of content that I'm sharing, I want someone to take an action from that. I want someone to click through and visit the fundraiser. I want someone to click through, visit the fundraiser, maybe donate. I want someone to share the post. And I think that if you can speak to someone and touch their heart, I think that's one of the ways that you can drive those actions. So that's something I always try to keep in the back of my mind whenever I'm storytelling.
And to touch their heart, do you follow story frameworks or something that helps you make sure that you're not just kind of winging it one day, but you're actually winning it every time you're doing it because you've got a set practice or framework that you use?
Yeah, I guess my framework is I always have a really attention-grabbing headline. Like, I want this headline to make someone stop and go, wow. Because, as we all know, as you're scrolling in your feed, to get someone to stop and actually watch or read something is difficult these days. I think I heard a stat that we scroll through the length of the height of the Empire State Building every day or something crazy like that. So getting someone to stop is powerful. And one way that I've found to do that is just by really, really catching their attention from the get-go. So that headline that's on the one sentence, that one liner that's really going to get someone to stop and look at it, I think is probably the biggest driving force in my own content. From there, once they're in, they'll keep reading, but it's really that first part, that hook, that's going to get them to stick.
And what's the trick to that? Because I wrestle like so many people do, finding the right headlines for, to get, sometimes you just get to the point where you're so exhausted, like, that'll work. Let me just move on. What do you do, or what do you look for in a headline that makes it really powerful?
I personally do a couple things. One is I kind of like to see how if it's a story that's already out there, how are other people talking about it? How did a reporter frame it? Typically if it's getting picked up by the news, maybe multiple outlets have had a chance to write their own headlines. How did they frame it? I like to go onto social media and see how are people talking about the story there. I think that you can take inspiration from multiple different areas or people and kind of build a one sentence headline, like I'm saying, that is really all encompassing and emotionally resonant and hits all these pieces, in 5, 7, 10 words.
And are you trying to trigger your audience? I mean, do you use conflict in your headlines often, or is there a secret to that? Is it a negative one? Is it a positive headline? What pulls better? What do you think about when you're writing them?
I think that we always try to stick to positive framing, at least from GoFundMe, but I do know that some brands have a lot of success, kind of causing a stir, if you want to call it that. Because, if someone sees the post that you have and maybe they don't agree with it, maybe they'll want to click in and they'll want to comment. And, when people are going back and forth in your comment section, that's engagement. That's what's going to boost your post in the algorithm. So all press is good press? Maybe so.
Maybe so. So you've got your headline down. You got them hooked in. They come in, and now you're actually telling the story like of the 8-year-old boy that helped. Was it Devontae raise money for to repair his home and to ultimately get a car? When you get into talk about that story, because I know you also talk about turning moments into movements, and really every story is about a moment in time when something happened, something changed, and there was this outcome, maybe even a surprising outcome, that actually creates an aha moment we learn from, or it underscores our business point. So when you are actually into the bulk of your content and storytelling, are there any story frameworks that you follow there just to make that sure that you tell that story in the right way that's going to truly hack through the noise and hook into the hearts of your audiences?
I do think that I like to err on the side of telling the story in its entirety, but keeping it as succinct as possible. I'm of the opinion that people don't want to leave where they're currently at. So what I mean by that is if I'm on Instagram and I'm reading a story, I want to stay on Instagram and finish it. Asking someone to leave a platform or leave where they currently are at is a big ask. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they're not going to do it. So for me personally, I prefer to have all the information that's needed in that post and that they can quickly digest, and then they can choose whether or not they want to take that next action of going to visit the fundraiser or going to donate. So that's kind of how I approach it. So I would say, most of my posts on Instagram are probably no more than 100, maybe 200 words.
Mm-hmm. And then it's always accompanied, of course, with some sort of startling or powerful or emotionally wrought photo or image or video.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I've been doing recently that's really been working is I do that static image first with the headline that really draws people in. And I use the carousel format. And in my second carousel slide, I've been adding a video. That video can be from TikTok. It could be from, one of our fundraisers. It could be a news video. And I've been seeing an incredible amount of engagement. It's increased four-fold. So I've been finding a lot of success using carousel formats. I know that Instagram has announced that they are going to be, shifting their focus away from Reels and more back into the feed. So I think that that's just signal that that's already happening.
What's already happening? That they're going to carousels more than stories?
Carousels more than Reels, yeah.
Reels, yeah. Okay, so you're kind of are ahead of that trend a little bit. And you're saying, and why do you think that's working?
I think it's because if you have a really eye-catching hook to bring people into that carousel and get them to swipe once over, and they stay on that video that you have for however long the video is, 30 seconds, a minute, that's more signal that Instagram is getting that, hey, this post is engaging. Someone just swiped and they stayed on the post for an additional 45 seconds. So that's what I would put it back to. But secondarily, I think the video that you share has to be engaging itself, because if it's not, then someone's not going to stick around and watch it.
Yeah. All right. Final question here. We've covered the headline. We've covered the bulk of the story. Let's talk about, you say, show, don't sell. I love that line. Show, don't sell. How do you create successful call to actions?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I guess I could say, one thing I don't do is I never specifically post content and say, go donate here, go donate here. I think that by telling these stories, the call to action it's almost innate. Like the viewer, the reader gets it. They know what they need to do. They know that this is being shared by GoFundMe. They know that this person probably has a fundraiser. So by show, don't tell, or show, don't sell, I mean, asking people to take an action is sometimes a turnoff. And so sometimes it's better to just lean into your story and make them make that own connection in their own head.
Yeah, you're really inviting them into the story that way. You're not telling them what to do. You're showing them what's happening, and you're hoping that they're going to step into your story and become an active participant through GoFundMe.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Brittany. Where can people learn more about you and the good work you're doing over GoFundMe? Where should we send them?
Yeah, I would say you could visit my Twitter. I'm at twitter.com/Brit, BRIT, _cab, CAB. That's probably the best way to reach me. And from there, you can kind of click around and find my website and all of that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on our show today, Britt.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening to this edition. If you like what you heard, please share it with your friends, family, colleagues. If you haven't been over to GoFundMe in a while, which I haven't for a while, actually, go check it out. I mean, they are doing some really amazing work, and it just feels to me kind of like they've got brand purpose completely built into the DNA of GoFundMe.com. So check it out. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. If you have yet to take your and but therefore ABTs of Agile Communications training, you can find it at businessofstory.com/ABT and put this messaging marvel to work for you. And until next Monday, when we'll have another amazing story artist right here for you like Britt, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that's an epic one. Thanks so much for listening.